but I kind of felt like, is it, I wanted to stand up in the middle of the room and disrupt the whole dungeon scene, the whole play space going on, and say, is it okay if I don't play? Do I have to play if I want to stay here? Welcome to another episode of the Kink Tank. I'm your host, Mr. Michael, and this time we'll be exploring some of the problems and issues with peer pressure in our kink communities and relationships. So strap in and enjoy another production made just for thinking kinksters like yourself. All right, and we're live. So we got a couple of people here in the room with us, and today's topic we're going to be talking about peer pressure in the kink community. So thank you, Josie and Rebecca, for coming in. We might have some folks that float in a little bit later, but this was a topic that was suggested to me a couple of weeks ago. Actually, it was right after the last Kink Tank thing, and it was because of something they observed in the community. There was a party that they were at, and, talking about peer pressure, I don't know, usually you think of like high school and, people sort of getting other people, all the cool kids are doing it, don't you want to be like everybody else? And it just seemed kind of silly to me that we might have something like that going on in our communities, but I could see what they were talking about in this particular situation. There was someone who was brand new, who was at a party, was hanging out. There was a lot of socializing going on. There was some play going on, and they were interested in the play that they were seeing. I think it might have been some kind of rope going on, and they were like, I don't know. And then apparently there were a couple of people that were, oh, you should do it, you should try it, yeah, go ahead, it's safe, it's all good and everything. And they were, no. So I don't know, I guess it does exist. I mean, that's peer pressure in a certain way, but I don't know if that's, in this situation they're trying to be helpful, I guess, but comes across as pressuring. I mean, do you guys ever see that in the parties or communities and other things that you go to?
I think there's going to be pressure like that in any community, especially when people are trying something new. I think a lot of times it's well-meaning. Peer pressure makes it sound negative all the time, but I think it can be like peer pressure may also be peer support. It just seems like peer pressure at the time, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed by what they're saying. Okay. But I think that's normal, right? I mean,
well, I get the impression, I mean, the person who suggested this topic to me was kind of appalled at this, like was getting ready to step in and say, hey, we don't do that here. That's not okay. But I feel like sometimes it's motivated by good things. You have a new person that's coming in and they're looking at some of these things that are happening in a dungeon space. They think they might want to experience something or take part, and they're not sure that it's okay. And really what I think for some people, that kind of pressure that they're exerting is not, oh, come on, don't you want to be cool like the rest of us? It's, no, really, it's okay. You can try this. It's a safe place. And, they're kind of talking, it's like they're not talking them into it. They're kind of talking them out of their reservations about it. And so I don't think it's always necessarily coming from a bad place, or something that I feel like needs to be, policed a little bit better or something like that. But I don't know.
Well, that too, enthusiasm can also carry away with certain people. So some people who are well-meaning and they don't mean it to sound pressuring might be like, oh, come on, join in, and then that person could say, oh, no, it's okay, and then that person keeps pushing and pushing, and I think that's where it can kind of get, it's hard to tell the boundary there, because some people just need a lot of extra motivation, and some people just feel really uncomfortable about that. I think some of that, too, comes down to your boundaries. Like, if someone's pushing you to the point where you're feeling actually pushed instead of kind of constructively nudged, then at that point it kind of becomes, I think, part of your responsibility to say, hey, I'm not feeling comfortable with this, but hey, thanks for trying to help me out. Maybe in an hour, or maybe next time, or.
Yeah, and I kind of had an experience like that back in one of our older parties. There was a new person who the two of us are actually pretty close to, that came to a party and sort of expressed an interest in playing, and found somebody who was going to do sort of a light scene, but she had body issues. And she was like, well, I'd like to try this flogging, I'd like to try doing this scene, but I can't take my clothes off. And we're all like, yeah, you can take your clothes off. Look around the room. I mean, there's like naked people of all shapes and sizes around here. It's not such a big deal. And she was not accepting that. I mean, when you're brand new and you really don't know what the atmosphere is like, and you don't know what kind of body acceptance a group has and so forth. But I kind of also got the impression that she was asking to be talked into it, or really what she had in mind was that she was hoping that the top that was in the scene would just, I don't know, cut him off with scissors, just like take away her choice of whether or not she wanted to have clothes on during the scene.
Sure.
Because that's, hot to think about, but that would be the ultimate pressure, I guess.
But she didn't like people, or she did like people doing that.
I don't know. I know now that probably was the case. That's the only reason, because I still know her, and I can kind of make that judgment about her. But at the time, I didn't know her very well, so I didn't, I wouldn't have taken that risk if she said, "Oh no, please, I want to keep my shirt on." And if it had been me playing with her, I wouldn't have taken the liberty to, rip her clothes off or order her to be naked or something like that, because, that's quite a gamble when you don't know how somebody's going to react to it. Now that I know her, for several years, I probably, if I had been the top in that situation, I probably could have known to push past that and just kind of make her do it. It's like, I think for her it was that girls of a certain kind do this kind of thing in dungeon spaces at sex parties, and she didn't want to be that girl. But if somebody was making her do it, then she could not be responsible for that, I guess.
Oh yeah, some people just kind of need permission.
Right, and that's what I wonder.
Permission, sure.
Yeah, sometimes when we feel like we're pressured in the community, sometimes maybe there are people who are, they're just trying to give permission. No, it's okay. It's cool. You can, I had an experience like that at one of my first parties here in Louisville. I went with a partner, and it seemed like it wasn't one particular person, but there were about 4 people that came up to me over the course of the night that were saying, we got all this dungeon furniture around, and if you want to play, you could take your partner over there. Do you have toys? I'll even loan you some toys, but you can play if you want to. It's all okay, And I was like, no, thanks, I'm fine. I'm just kind of soaking it in and just kind of watching tonight. Didn't really plan on playing or anything like that. And then, 15 minutes later, I have somebody else coming up to me basically saying the same thing. If you want to play, you can play. I mean, it's cool. If you want to play, we'd be fine with that. And we can, here, I'll help you. Like, what are you into? Like, maybe we can help. And I was like, I'm cool, really. It's okay. I'm just here watching tonight, and it's fine. And, after the third time, I started getting a little ornery. But it wasn't one person. It wasn't just one person badgering me, and in that case I probably would have felt more offended. But I kind of felt like, is it, I wanted to stand up in the middle of the room and disrupt the whole dungeon scene, the whole play space going on, and say, is it okay if I don't play? Do I have to play if I want to stay here, or should I leave?
Name tag. Do I need a name tag that says, not tonight, thank you?
Right. And,
well, I think that's a really good point about, like, that peer pressure, whether it does or doesn't happen. I think some of that comes down to, too, how permeable your boundaries are. Mm-hmm. Some people, I think, go into a place like that with really kind of permeable boundaries. And you can tell because they'll go, oh, no, I don't want to do that. And then one person will go, yes, you do. And they'll go, okay, yes, I do. That kind of a person has really kind of loose boundaries, loose rules. I think some people give off more of a, like, I have never felt peer pressure in a play space, in any of the play spaces that I've gone to, that has bothered me. It's not that I've not experienced it, but I have really impermeable boundaries. If I make a decision like I'm just going to be social tonight, or this is my first party and I haven't got it figured out yet, I think I usually do a good job of kind of communicating, not an option, thank you. I'm friendly, but some people don't do that as well, and I wonder if it's harder for them. Like, they feel it more as peer pressure because they haven't taken a rigid stance either way. Does that make sense?
Sure. And not only that, but when you're talking about multiple people at the party or in a dungeon space or something like that, they weren't there when you enforced your boundaries very firmly to the person before you.
Right.
You were there, so it feels like, quit badgering me, but
right.
it might be that, they're just trying to give you permission, like you're the new guy and you don't know how this works. So they're kind of saying, like earnestly, they mean, if you want to play, you can play. It's cool.
Right.
There's some furniture. You can claim a piece of furniture, and you can have a scene with your partner. And they're trying to make it okay. Of course, play parties are more fun with more people playing, and I think they were kind of thinking of that as far as like, let's get this party going. But it's not usually the new guy who's going to get that done.
Yeah, I think it does depend on how sensitive the person is. I don't mean to lay blame for peer pressure. Peer pressure can happen, and it's bad, and when it's bad, it is bad. But I think a lot of times what people what they receive as peer pressure wasn't meant to be peer pressure. So if I'm one of those people who's like, hey, you having a good time? You're not playing. Do you need me to show you around? I'm not trying to peer pressure anybody, and I think anyone else who's doing that most of the time is not, at least in the community that I'm familiar with, or the communities that I'm familiar with. I think they mean well, but if you are a sensitive person, it can totally come off as, get off my back, I already told you no,
Mm-hmm. Well, I've had this come up with the whole introvert extrovert thing, being welcoming at events and so forth. When I go up to somebody who's sitting alone at the table, they're kind of, maybe they're new, or maybe they're, fairly new, and I see them over at the table, and I'm not saying, you need to get out and talk to these people, because why are you here otherwise? What I'm doing is, I'm trying to give permission. That is, there are seats over here if you'd like to sit over here. Now, maybe that feels to them like I'm pressuring them, like, isn't it okay that I sit in this seat and just kind of hang out and watch everything? Well, of course it is. But I wanted to make sure that they knew that they could be more involved if they wanted to be, and for some people who I feel, where they're doing that hemming and hawing thing, I might actually say, okay, well, you can't sit here. I'm taking you somewhere else. But, I take a gamble when I do that. I could really end up making somebody feel like their boundaries were encroached upon too much. But sometimes when I get the message like, well, they're just kind of shy, and what they'd really like is for somebody to walk them over to the table and say, hey, everybody, this is so-and-so, and they're new, and make them feel welcome. That's kind of what they were waiting for. They didn't have the courage to go and do that themselves. But if somebody's making them do it, then that's a different thing. It's a fine line there, but I can see where, giving permission could be construed by some people as peer pressure. Like I'm saying, don't you want to be with everybody else? And you should do this. This is, you'll have a better time if you do this. You'll have a better time if you play at the party. You'll have a better time if you take your clothes off while you play. Those are all just kind of suggestions, but they could all be taken wrong, I suppose.
Yeah, and I still think peer pressure can be a really positive thing. I wish there was another word for that kind of peer pressure, like positive peer pressure.
You said
It's all the
peer
same word.
support.
Yeah,
I
I
like.
mean, I think what they mean is peer support, and I think it can be a really positive thing, even when it's kind of aggressive, because some people just they think you're being nice, just for nice's sake the first time, but you weren't. You were genuinely being nice to someone, or just kind of giving them the little push that they need, or I think it can be a good thing. I think it's a really valuable part of community in general. A lot of people say they don't want to be part of community because they don't really see the value in it, or the risk, or the whatever outweighs all the positives. And I think this is one of the positives of a community, is that type of peer pressure, peer support.
Do you think there exists a pressure to try new things? Some people come into the community and they're specifically into spanking, and that's pretty much all they're interested in doing. And I think some folks in the community have this idea like, well, that's just one item on the buffet, man. If you haven't tried all these other things, look at all this great stuff that you're missing out on. And I have so much fun doing X, Y, and Z. You would, if you tried it, you would like it, And we get that, it's kind of like the picky eater. Nope, all I want is chicken McNuggets. That's all I want to eat. Oh my God, you're missing out on the best parts of food, And
Yeah.
and I feel very strongly in the food sense, like I do know better, because there is a lot out there that is great, and even a picky eater would be able to expand their horizons a little bit. And I think sometimes we feel like we know better when it comes to kink too.
Yeah, maybe, but I honestly have just never seen it. I've seen it said a different way, right? So I know that I've seen some people have come in and they've been really vocal about, I am specifically into spanking. That's what I'm in for. That's what I want. And then they've gotten a pretty, by a talking to by a few people, basically along the lines of, don't shop, it will not be successful. Don't come in looking for that one specific thing, it won't be successful. But I don't think it's usually because they're not looking for more than one thing. I mean, how many people have we met or do we know that are very into one thing? And you know this because when you're talking about someone, especially when they have more than one, like, there's more than one David in the room, and you're like, oh, well, wrote David. And then you know exactly who you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And how many people are like that? There's a bunch, or someone who is clearly mostly into little things or kitten things or whatever they do. And I think they're not really shamed. I feel like those people are kind of applauded, like for having crafted their skill or for being like very dedicated to what they're clearly into. You're only into puppy play, but you're like the best I've seen at puppy play, so I'm okay with that. I feel like I've seen that more often than I've seen like shaming about, you only wanting one thing, or pressure about not trying more things.
Well, do you think there's a pressure that sort of happens involuntarily just by the attitude of the community? So if most people think that this way of doing things is the greatest way, or like in this example, pressure to open up your relationship, because we see a lot of that in our community where monogamous people come in and you have other people that are like, monogamous people, yeah, we've got a few of them. There's two people sitting over there. Those are the monogamous. Everyone else in the room, if they're not having romantic relationships with other people, they're having MS or DS dynamics with other people, or they're play partners, multiple play partners. And for somebody coming into the community, they look around and they're like, wow, everybody just kind of piles together into a big. It's all incestuous. It's like this person's playing with this person who's dating that person who is owned by this person, and that's a little bit overwhelming. And no, I've never heard anybody at a Munch or an event or a party say, you two guys, you need to open up your relationship because this monogamy thing is like too vanilla. I've never heard something strong like that, but I wonder if, because our community seems to be a little more fluid that way, and we we're okay with people taking multiple play partners or multiple romantic relationships, or if they feel like, well, everybody else is kind of this way, like if we want to belong better, then maybe we should relax that up a little bit or take a look at it. Like maybe that's something that we should be doing too. Everybody else seems to be doing it.
I think absolutely. I think that absolutely does happen. But I think what's really interesting about that is, at least in the communities that I am familiar with, monogamy is the standard, not the other way around. But I think a lot of people come into those communities and they see, one or two people doing it, or the quarter of the people that are doing it, and then those people stand out, right? Because they're either not familiar with that in their regular life. They're like, Polly, what is this? It's a new thing, so it's kind of interesting. Or it's just so bizarre to them that they just kind of watch those people within the community. But I don't think it's the rule. I think the rule is or the most popular option is still monogamy. But those people tend to be kind of loud and proud, at least the ones that I know. They're very out in that regard. And I think absolutely there's pressure for, like, in their minds, they feel some pressure to kind of move that direction, either because they'd like to try it, or because they see those people and they start to think they're the rule just because they notice them more.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of that comes down to, and I feel like I'm like blaming them, but I feel like a lot of that does come down to your boundaries. So, or your security with your own relationship structure. Like if you're super, super secure in what you do, you're probably not going to be exploring that option. But if you're kind of insecure about what you're doing, or you're just really eager to try a lot of things, then you're more susceptible to that kind of pressure.
I agree that people who feel pressure in that way, it kind of says something about, that they are malleable or open to, or they're just not very set in what they're doing, or don't have a lot of confidence in the relationship model that they've chosen in this case, where maybe monogamy isn't really working all that well for them, or it kind of like, oh, we can do that. It might just like set a light bulb off, where it wasn't presented as an option, and certainly in other circles in their life with other social groups and family and so forth, that's not something that would ever be acceptable. But here, this might be lukewarm water where we can try out some of these things because we both talked about it, or we know that we've both thought about it. Wouldn't it be nice to play with other people? Or we're both kind of toppies, so we're not really sure how this is going to work between the two of us. They've had a discussion about, well, maybe we're going to need to entertain the possibility of having activities with other people.
Yeah, and I think that those people too, the ones who I most often hear like that will say out loud, unprompted, I feel pressure to have an open relationship versus, the opposite. I think a lot of those people, at least that I have met, that have said, I tried it, it always ends in disaster. Like I've never heard a good story about how they responded to that kind of pressure and tried it. Good. And that's not saying, like, some people will come in, they'll see it, and then they'll go, hey, where have you been all my life? And then, you find this new thing that works for you. But the people who read that as pressure, who then try it anyway, it usually does seem like that's a pretty negative force.
Right. Which
is also interesting. And I think we've had this conversation before in other kind of group settings, in other, community gatherings, this whole idea of kind of owning what's yours, kind of, there's no standard for people that come around here. It's not like everyone in the community is going to have high self-esteem, or everyone in the community is going to have security in their, life or anything else. There's nothing really that makes us special, that makes us immune to those kinds of things. But it's certainly an environment that's going to bombard you with all these new things, new opportunities for experiences, and pretty intense experiences. So if you haven't kind of worked a lot of that out with yourself, or you're not familiar with kind of some self-talk to kind of keep yourself in line, I think that peer pressure can be really strong and really kind of damaging in some regards.
Mm-hmm. In that case that you're talking about, I can think of at least one example. Maybe this is just anecdotal, but the the way that I do relationships, and the way I manage my own relationships, if somebody were interested in being involved with me, and they were saying, I really dig you and I want to have something with you, I'm a monogamous person, let's have a monogamous thing. And I'm saying, well, if you want to be involved with me, then you can't have that. You know, it's not going to work because I'm not that way. But even if I weren't involved with other people, let's just say I was kind of a, you know, just single guy, just kind of floating around at events and stuff, and I say, well, if you're going to be with me, then you're going to have to, you know, prepare yourself for this. You know, I have other relationships. I like to be open to form other relationships and so forth. They may read that as pressure. Like what I'm telling them is, if you want to be involved with me, then you have to do this. And I, you know, pressured them into non-monogamous relationships by basically saying, and really I'm doing no such thing. What I'm saying is, this is a fact. This is the way I roll.
Right, and I think timing with that matters too, right? Like when it's considered pressure. If you did that at the beginning of a relationship, I feel like that is disclosure. That's like honesty up front. You know, this is how it is. I think if you did that in the middle of a relationship, like, you know, shape up or ship out, that is definitely pressure because, you know, you have a choice at that point. You either do what this person wants to do or you don't get to be in the relationship anymore, and I think that's hard too. It's a different kind of pressure, but I think the timing of that definitely matters, and the phrasing of it. You know, I'd like to explore this versus change or get out, is the phrasing totally matters.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I also think that some people who don't understand their, you know, their agency as a submissive, that if it were proposed to them that, you know, I'm your master and you're my slave and we've started along this path and you belong to me, you have no say in these things, you've agreed that I am your owner and caretaker and so forth, you will fuck women for me. You know, that's pressure. You know, I don't know about peer pressure. Of course, there is always this, you know, what can somebody do when that happens? There are options, but I don't think that necessarily everybody feels like there are. Well, you know, I was pressured into it because I was sort of commanded to do something by somebody who held power over me.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question.
I don't like to hear that because I kind of feel like, well, I mean, yeah, especially when we're talking about masters and slaves and how they exist in this world in a BDSM context. But, you know, if you put that on the scales and you say, well, I can do this that I don't really want to do, or I can risk losing my collar or have to basically treat this as a deal breaker and say, well, this can't work out, I need out, which is always a person's right to do. But they don't necessarily realize that. They're just, well, I agreed to this and now I have to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and it's kind of a different question. It's kind of like, you know, is pressure in an MS or DS capacity, is it healthy? Is it dangerous? Is it kind of this ground for exploitation? I mean, it's kind of like that's an interesting question. I don't know. I think some of that pressure is probably part of a healthy relationship. If you have this person that you can trust, and then that person is saying, you know, if that person, I don't know, maybe in that regard, if I have a slave who's a female, and I know that this person has wanted to ask this girl on a date for a long time, but doesn't have the guts to do it, and then I say, you know, you're going to ask her on a date. Is that pressure? Yeah. In that regard, though, if I have their trust and I know that that's kind of a thing that they want to do, it may seem uncomfortable to them, but in the end, is it a good thing? Like, can that pressure be positive?
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
It's like.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Thank you. Okay. I see what y'all are saying. If he's going to ask me to do something that is totally beyond my realm or what I wanted to do, then we didn't have enough conversation in the beginning.
I agree.
You know what I'm saying? Because he was supposed to be looking out for my best interest.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? So yeah, if it gets to that point where I have that uncomfortable feeling like that, then obviously we did not communicate enough.
Yeah, and that's a question again of boundaries, right? So if you have healthy communication and good boundaries, then that's probably what you would think. If you maybe don't have healthy communications and you maybe have bad boundaries, then when he says that and then all you feel is pressure instead of an opportunity to make a choice, I think that's the difference.
Right.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the answer, Josie, when you were talking about sometimes that's a good nudge, and sometimes that's a bad pressure. I think the difference in that comes in, really how good they are for each other. I mean,
Yeah, and the conversations that you've had, I think that she's absolutely right. Having that discussion beforehand or having that discussion continuously is probably a huge factor in whether you feel that as pressure or not.
mm-hmm. No, yeah, and I think that somebody, when I own somebody or I have power over somebody, and they have trust for me that I'm looking out for their interests,
Yeah.
and we know each other very well, and I can make a good decision that isn't necessarily centered on me, but maybe for their own good. Yeah, get out there. You're going to ask that girl out because I'm tired of hearing about it, and you just sitting around wishing that you were spending time with this person or getting to know them. Right. So you kick the bird out of the nest and you say, all right, go fly. And I think that can be good motivation, but if you don't know the person that you're doing that with well enough, that could actually be a big detractor to their trust in you next time.
Oh, yeah, really negative pressure.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
All right. Let's see, I muted Rebecca's microphone. I guess she muted herself back. That's cool. And we had a visitor for a short period of time there. And I hope she can come back if she can. Looks like she might be having some connection issues, but anyways, we'll continue on with this. I did get a question. We have the Q&A thing set up in our video. People that are watching, normally if you take the screen and you hover your mouse, if you're on your computer, I don't think it works on your phone. If you hover your mouse over your screen, you'll see a little drop-down menu that allows you to turn on your Q&A application in which you can submit questions to be asked to the people that are, involved on cam here and in the discussions. But I had somebody text me a thought, which was sort of the way that kink without DS is sort of looked down upon in our community, and I think they're probably talking about our community in the Kentucky area specifically. But I think what it comes from is they feel a pressure by some people to incorporate DS into their relationship somehow, or that anybody that they want to have SM play with, people that they want to play with, are also sort of demanding or sort of assuming that there's going to be some kind of DS component that goes along with that. Where you may just want to bottom to somebody, that doesn't mean you want them to be your boss.
Yeah.
Do you feel
I think that's
like
a really great question. I think that's a really legitimate feeling. I would agree with that person. I think there definitely is a pretty hefty amount of pressure because that's what they're saying, right? That there's pressure to have DS, not just to be kinky in any way.
They're saying that not having DS is sort of looked down on. So I
it's
feel
not really
like
about DS.
But so I feel like the question, sort of relates in that way, because if you feel like something's looked down on, there are subtle and collective pressures that sort of say, well, that's not the norm, or you're doing it wrong, or it's better if you do it this way. That there's sort of inherent pressure to engage in DS when maybe you've thought about it. I mean, if you're new, I imagine that people should entertain those ideas if they haven't really done the work. But if you've done the work and you say, no, it's not my thing. I'm bottom. That's what I want. And that's where it's at. I think it can maybe be tough, especially with potential play partners. If somebody came to me with that and said, I want to bottom to you, I may not be interested in that. And maybe they feel that as pressure when I say, well, look, I'm not really interested in just me topping you. I mean, sometimes I have fun with that, but that's something that I do for people that I have other relationships with. And so if I'm saying I wouldn't bother doing that. I don't get enough out of it unless there's some kind of power dynamic between us or some sort of service aspect or some sort of deference to me anyways. I might not be interested in that. Maybe they read that as pressure if they're going to certain partners and saying, hey, I'd like to play with you. And they're like, all right, well, get down on your knees and tell me how much of a god I am. Well, no, that wasn't what I was asking for. Oh, well, isn't that how we do this? Isn't that how we play? Well, that's how some people play.
Yeah, I think that's totally real. I think that perception that, you should have DS if you're going to do kink too, because they naturally go together, and that, it's not real kink without DS. But I think a lot of that is probably because they don't really understand kink without DS. Like, DS makes sense. It's very organized. Someone is on the top, someone is on the bottom, someone makes the orders, somebody receives them. It's kind of cut and dry. But when you just say that you're kinky and, you're into all kinds of different things, you switch with people, you do all these different activities that may not even include a power exchange. Like, maybe you're just a puppy without an owner and you're, like, totally happy to just do that. There's no DS to that, really. It's just kink, but that's kind of difficult to wrap your head around sometimes. Mm-hmm. So I think those people are, I think they need to look a little, I think they're not totally understanding the spirit of the thing. And also, I think it's just really a simplified way of looking at it. There's this whole other world of it. But I think it's really there. I think I've experienced it, and I think I'm at this point, I can call myself a pretty experienced member in more than one community that is local, and I think I've experienced it in both of those communities, and I still do, even though people, for the most part, know who I am. I mean, I'm not really a stranger to most people. I think I still experience it all the time, and I think it comes from a lack of understanding. Like, if you're not into DS, what are you into? What is it that you're? Yeah, it's like you don't fit into the box very well, and that's challenging.
Yeah, and I think part of it might have to do with a bottom, somebody who's into sensations or somebody who's into receiving pain, and maybe they're not even particularly picky about who they're receiving it from. In a DS relationship, it's probably, I'm going to venture to say, it's maybe a little bit more important. My experience has been that those people who are interested in DS, who play on bottom, they play on bottom with people that have power over them or who they are attached to, involved with. There's like this trust. They kind of need that in order to do some of these SM activities. And then there's just kind of the free agent bottom or top, even bottom or top, who they're mostly into receiving sensation, giving sensation, inflicting pain, receiving pain. And they can be looked around, they can be looked at by some less enlightened or, let's say, judgmental people as just whores. You just play whores.
Right. Isn't that a double standard? So you're wrong if you don't do DS, but you're also wrong if you bottom without a top. So how is that person ever supposed to even win? Clearly they're interested in DS, but in the absence of a top. That's the same thing. That's like saying, you're not interested in MS, so I've gotten that one too. Well, if someone isn't interested in putting a collar on you, it's not really a flaw in you that you don't want one. It may just be the absence of the other. You can't do that alone, I guess is the point of that. So I think that's a really strong double standard, and I very rarely hear that kind of pressure toward men. I very commonly hear that pressure toward women, and that's also a really interesting thing. I don't think it's because women are more sensitive to that kind of pressure. I think it's because women receive it, and very commonly from other women. So I think that's a really interesting part of that kind of issue also.
All right, I'm just looking to see. Let me turn on my little Q&A app and see if anybody has submitted anything. Doesn't look like. Nope. So we're just going to carry on. I don't know how long we've gone 40 minutes so far, and I think we've covered a great deal. We don't have as many participants in this one as we've had in the past, so a little less input from different angles. But we'll go until we feel like this thing's been talked out. There was another kind of pressure that before we started the broadcast, I was thinking of different ways that this might manifest itself in the community. And there is one sort of, I think it's maybe even self-imposed pressure. It's not necessarily coming from peers explicitly, but the sort of competition idea that, you have a reputation as being a heavy bottom, somebody who just takes all kinds of excruciating, intense types of play, and then somebody sort of one-ups you or outdoes you, or do people feel like, well, if I just like a certain kind of play, I like to be spanked with a stuffed animal, that's not like super hardcore, that's not big pain or anything like that. And then there's somebody who's got a cricket bat that they're getting taken to their ass, that there might be of course that's like a spectacle, and people get sort of patted on the back like, wow, that was really intense, good job. And then the person who's getting beaten on the ass with a stuffed animal might be sort of like, really, what was that? What, I don't get that, or anybody can do that, or I don't know. Is there a certain kind of competition that goes along with this, or a way that people pressure themselves, like I need to play harder or I need to play differently, because there is a certain hierarchy of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for, a hierarchy of importance in our community, that this is like lesser play and this is intense play, and the people that only enjoy soft, cuddly things aren't like real players or something. I don't know exactly. Do you know what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, and I think that definitely exists. I think a lot of that pressure, though, that at least as I understand it, a lot of it also comes from like the culture of the community that you're coming from. So in one community, you might feel pressure, and in one that I think I participate with, I do feel like there's maybe a little pressure to, everyone kind of wants to one-up each other sometimes. They want to play a little harder, a little more interesting, and I think it's all friendly. It doesn't come from a bad place. But then there are other communities where I think there's really strong pressure to tone it way back, to be a little more PC, to be a little like to censor almost. Like I think there's pressure to censor yourself in some communities because one is too, because you're just too crazy, or because you might do something damaging to the reputation of that community.
Mm-hmm.
But I think both of those exist, and I think they have like positive uses, but I think they can be really, really, really bad when it comes to that pressure to censor, that pressure to be careful. But then there's another kind too that's like pressure to play safer. Like you don't want to be judged by everyone who's in the room, so you're going to wear gloves when you play with needles, even though you don't usually. Like that kind of pressure also.
Okay. Yeah, there probably is some of that going, pressure for safety, or pressure for, certain, I guess, precautions and so forth. People in their homes when there's nobody else around may not feel the same kind of pressure.
Yeah, I think so. Well, you're always going to be more mindful of an audience, but I think there's like active pressure in some places to do things a certain way. Like the pressure to do it right, like is there a right way? And I'm one of those people who's probably going to tell you there's not a right way to do almost anything. I mean, some stuff clearly, You should not maybe be like slicing up somebody's throat on the regular. But, you know, outside of those extremes, I don't think there's a right way to do stuff. And when that pressure starts kind of telling you that there's a right way, I'm usually very weary of that person.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, sometimes those are actually baked into the rules of the play space.
Sure.
You know, where they're saying, if you're going to do this, then you have to have that. And I don't know, I mean, I guess that's some kind of pressure. I look at it as a different kind of animal, I guess. But there are best practices, and I imagine there are some judgments that go around during public play events where people are saying, you know, they need to be more careful, or they need to, you know, take a class on this subject or something like that, where that it may just be that they're doing things different than they think is correct or the safest way or something like that. But I want to talk a little bit about what you brought up before, and that was pressure for PC, you know, pressure for sensitivity to other people. That I think we have kind of a mechanism in our community that it's a hive mechanism where when people see something collectively that they don't like, they have a way of making you feel like that was inappropriate or that was, you know, not sensitive to other people. So if you were to do a you know, reenact a domestic violence situation, for instance, in public, in a safe space, you know, but it looks awful. And everybody in the room who's had an issue with domestic violence suddenly has to leave the room. Otherwise, they're going to puke or, you know, have a breakdown or something like that. You know, they're really setting off some bad emotions for some people. And I think there is a certain pressure to censor ourselves to a sort of accepted, what's the word, an accepted standard of appropriate behavior in a dungeon, because we have to not just enjoy our kink and do whatever it is that turns us on or what we like to do, but we also have to make sure that everybody else in the room is very comfortable with it. And that's a pressure I don't like to see.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think I've said before how I feel about that kind of pressure. I think it is a really negative thing. That kind of like when people are saying that they're going to be, basically you're talking about the concern of that a scene is offensive to somebody and trying to be sensitive to not offending someone else. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, that drives me crazy. That drives me crazy because we're all adults, and either you consent to watching that kind of a scene or you don't. And if you don't like it, you have the responsibility really to remove yourself from the situation. So that kind of pressure for me to like tone myself down because it might offend you, I think that just drives me crazy. You got to take some ownership of the responsibility for that, and it's not on me because my scene might disturb you. It's kind of on you for not just removing yourself away from that.
Right. But you would agree that there exists a pressure in the community to want everybody to feel comfortable all the time, or, you know, to let's not offend people, I guess.
Oh yeah, don't rock the boat.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's fair, but I think that people rocking the boat is necessary, you know, within certain boundaries. But I think that pressure is just not appropriate to new people or to old people. You just gotta take some responsibility for that kind of stuff.
I agree. Well, looks like we lost Rebecca, but we do have Nalaine here, and you've been here with us for a little while. Thanks for joining us. And someone new who just joined in, Aaron. Did you guys have anything to add to it, or questions, or, you know, instances of peer pressure or pressure in the community that you've experienced or wondered about? No, not so much.
I know some of us last night were also talking about like pressure for outness.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the idea that being out is a better way to be if you're hiding everything from everybody and you're super secretive about what you do and you don't have another support system in place who knows this about you, that you're not getting the most out of it. What's the argument there? They're saying that you're not being authentic, you're being a chicken shit. What is it? I mean, in that conversation you were having last night at the table, was there talk about pressure to be out?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we were talking specifically about that. I think there they were saying they felt pressure to be out, and that it was well received.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's kind of this kind of growing thing that didn't used to be there. It's like, I think maybe because everyone is pushing for, like, you should be out as gay because it helps the cause of being gay, and I wonder if that's also going to kink. Like, you should be out as being kinky because then it helps everyone be accepting. So maybe that's kind of what we were talking about, this kind of pressure to be out and the unique challenges with that.
Right. So what we need are more ambassadors to the vanilla world, and you're kind of hurting our cause by staying closeted all the time.
Yeah, and also that issue of, like, being authentic and all of that.
Okay. Well, Aaron types in chat a comment about noting pressure from some who have sort of a one-size-fits-all attitude, especially regarding DS and the notion of it's my job to push boundaries. A pressure, I guess, a pressure on dominance to go further, to maybe this relates to that competition thing that I was talking about before, but not necessarily competing with other people in that way, like but competing with ourselves, I guess, going further and progressing, getting more and more extreme. Or hang on just a second, because Aaron, I don't know if you realize this, but I just muted your mic because there's a lot of bumping sounds and stuff like that, but your microphone is working. If you'd like to speak into the microphone, I will. Yes, I can hear you, Nalaine.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, I've got my headphones on and trying to mute everything around me and figure this out still.
Yeah, it sounds like you were just kind of like bustling around trying to get stuff set up, but we can hear you loud and clear, and it sounds good now.
Good. In regards to my question, I've encountered some people, especially last night, where an individual came out and made a statement that, and I think it's more of an old guard or a mentality that only DS, and I was listening earlier when you had comments where a lot of people feel pressured that all kink has to be DS also, and they made a comment along the lines of, well, it's almost like my right, my privilege is expected to push the bottoms or the submissives' boundaries, and they had made a comment regarding our community, and I guess probably a lot of kinksters at large, that kinksters bottoms want to top from the bottom, or they don't want their boundaries pushed. They want the play that they like. My response to that was that that's fine, that's perfectly acceptable, and there's no reason to expect someone to negotiate only to your standards. If you're doing a relationship or even a play scene, it's a negotiated event. Once you have that relationship, if you feel that you're not allowed to push boundaries and that's what you want to do, then you're not in the right relationship.
Yes, I do. I agree. I've heard that sentiment before. I've actually heard that sort of put forth in even in leather contests where they've got the master and the slave up there, and the master says, well, as the master, it's my job to push her boundaries or his boundaries. And I thought, what? First of all, I'm doing this wrong because I don't always feel that way. But this blanket statement overall that as a master, my job is this. Like, every master has the same jobs, first of all.
And you guys are saying that too, that bottom doesn't want, like, reads that as pressure from the top. Like, that's a bad kind of pressure.
Right. Especially if the top is always pushing, or the dominant, I want to do this, I want to do this. I know it's your hard limit, I know it's a red flag, but I feel compelled, I want to do it. My attitude is, once again, you're just in the wrong relationship if the person you're topping has hard limits for that, and that's what you're wanting to do.
See, I have a situation similar to kind of like that. This one guy that I've been seeing for a little bit, he's super dominant, and I switch. I'm either or.
Mm-hmm.
And he has pain is his thing, and I'm all for a lot of pain, but he always is like, I want you to bring somebody in so that I can beat the hell out of them and beat you at the same time. I'm like, that's not what it's about. He's new to the whole scene and everything, but every time we've ever played together, that's what I get. I want you to look for somebody. I want you to put an ad out, and he pushes that with me, like, put an ad out and find me a pain slut. Put an ad out and find me somebody to come into this relationship so that I can beat the hell out of them. And I'm like, okay, well, if you want somebody like that, then I'm not the right person, because I'm all for pain, I'm all for this, I'm all for the whole thing, except for when you're pressuring me to bring somebody else in when you're not even filling my needs completely. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that earlier, about pressure to open up relationships, bring other people in, and I'm not sure exactly where that comes from. It might just be that people think that's the way these relationships work, or that because I have the power now, I don't have to consider what your ideas are about doing something like that. But and to Aaron's point, and we were talking about submissives being pressured by their dominance, or let's say bottoms being pressured by their tops to take more, to get to the next level, to try something new and more extreme and so forth. But I also think that dominants or tops are also pressured by other folks in the community, because it's people like the example that I gave of the title holder standing up there at the contest saying, as a master, it's my job to this and that. Oh, well, I'm a master. I guess that's my job too. Like, I should be. We all have the same job. We all have a cookie cutter way that we're supposed to be doing this. And if everybody else in the community sort of has that idea that a dominant's duty to their submissive is to take them new places and push them further than they've ever been before, and so on, if that's the prevailing idea in the community, then dominants and tops and masters feel pressure in the community. Well, I should be doing that too. I guess that's part of my job. I didn't realize it, but now I've been told. So
I kind of agree with that.
That's the same too. Is like people who are, you're not a real dominant because you totally just got that drink for her, or
yeah.
that kind of, has anyone ever heard that before? That kind of
often.
Yeah, so when you have something like that too, I wonder, is that pressure, like, is it kind of the community's responsibility to try to weed that out, to kind of systematically educate better to make that stop, or is that kind of the individual's responsibility to say something when someone says that, instead of laughing it off? Is it kind of their responsibility to say that, or is it, as a community leader, is that leader's responsibility to, I don't know, do a culture changing thing, I guess? Whose fault is that?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's kind of yes and no. I would say, for me personally, it's an individual. If you have a desire to speak up and say, hey, I don't agree with that attitude, then you do so. If you don't feel an urge to speak up against that because you might identify with it, then that's okay also. Is there a right way or a wrong way to train people who are technically adults?
Well, usually when sort of weighing out that idea in our community, I'm looking at whether the person who's saying that should know better, and whether the person who's receiving it is how new they are.
I agree.
I'm a little bit wary of. I would really hate for a new person to come in and be sort of given that gem of wisdom that they're not really submissive because they don't do this and that. I would hate to see a new person. I think it would probably be worse for than somebody who were a little more seasoned in the community, or just seasoned in BDSM in general, because they would have the confidence of their own ways to say, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. And the new person, I think, is maybe, there are exceptions to this, but there are, might be more inclined to say, oh, well, either I don't belong here or I'm really not submissive. Now I have to rethink this whole thing. And they don't realize that the rest of the people sitting around them at the table or, at the event are thinking, if they had heard the person say that, would, definitely go up to that person and say, yeah, don't listen to that guy. They might not realize that.
I feel like that also happens, like, most often to male dominance over female dominance. I mean, I guess that might also be because there's oftentimes in the room more of them than female dominance, just kind of numbers-wise. But I guess I would pose that to you guys. Has that ever happened to you? And does that pressure make you change? Does it kind of make you think, well, maybe I shouldn't do that, or maybe that is weird? If it's happened to you, which I was understanding earlier that it had.
Well, yeah, and it's happened to me. Fortunately, the last time I remember it happening to me, I was well situated in my ideas about dominance that it bothered me because it came from a person that should know better. But it didn't get to me like it might have if I was still sort of in my formative stages of what I thought about kink and dominance and mastery and so forth. I'm sure a lot of that happened, when I got started. It's just I'm starting to feel old because it's been long enough ago. I don't remember these individual little comments, and I don't remember all of the sum of like what formed my opinions about all these. It was very nice to hear that the person who was running the first Munch that I went to saw that me and my partner were probably new. We looked like we had never been there before. She pulled us aside, and she very specifically said, you're going to hear a lot of different opinions in here. Do not let anybody tell you in this room that you're doing it wrong. Don't let them tell you that their way is the right way and that your way is the wrong way. Everybody has their own. She was very good about that. It was a very nice way to sort of set the stage. And just that little thing that she gave me there, I think was most of the armor I needed. I remembered that. And I'm all for making my own rules anyway. It's just kind of as a problem with authority person. But it was... I try to do that in the newcomers meeting too. I try to pass that gem along because I feel like it's probably the best thing that influenced my ideas about my own security and what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do this. I felt good about.
I agree. I've heard the same thing. I guess after being around for about half a year or so, eventually it sinks in that there is no one true way. And I also repeat that to any new person I encounter. Identify what you want and define your relationship the way you desire.
Well, I think we have the luxury in this community and the Lexington community and Indian, a lot of our surrounding communities. I mean, we're more alike than we are different. Mm-hmm. And we do, I don't know, maybe it works different in different regions, different parts of the country. We're lucky that way. Sorry, I got a siren going right past my house. We do have a sort of prevailing idea about that, like, your way's right too, and I don't know that all communities have that. So it might be tough. The pressure might be different for people in a different community where there really is, the person who's saying, do it your own way, don't listen to these people, they're the exception, where everybody else, it seems, is of the opinion that if you're bottoming, then you should be submitting. If you're submitting, then you should be bottoming. If you're dominant, then you're just a master who hasn't fully committed themselves yet. those prevailing ideas might actually. I mean, I feel lucky in our community that we don't have some of those things, but that pressure might be very different and very real for other communities.
Do you think the pressure would be based upon the size of the community? The larger the community, the more options they have for pairings, therefore you can have more individuality and more individually defined relationships? Whereas in a smaller community where, let's say, somewhere in Timbuktu, they only have 20 people in the community, so the peer pressure of, oh, we follow the leader here, and the leaders have been around for 10 years, we're new, we follow in their footsteps, and there's only 20 people.
It probably has something to do with that. Does a larger group mean more opportunities for diversity and opposing opinions, or does a larger group mean a larger group of homogenized people who all believe the same thing, who drank the Kool-Aid when they came in, and now, and not only that, but other dissenting point of views are sort of suppressed or
chased away.
Chased away, or those people are made to feel pressure that makes them uncomfortable, so they don't stick around. So I don't know how big a group that you could make with all, with a lack of diversity and opinion in this.
Good point. Could be how the leaders of the community operate. Like you stated, when you came in, you were given a heads up about don't listen to that mentality.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, you adopted that more open-minded behavior.
Yeah. So to answer your question, I'm conflicted between a larger community would mean more points of view, or a larger community would mean more people reinforcing a certain point of view with you.
Like religion.
Yeah.
Like a particular sect of a religion, for example. And if you want a different type of sect or belief system within the same religion, go to another community. So.
Yeah, maybe you need to try the Pentecostals down the street.
Okay.
All right, we're not getting on religion, Aaron. Forget.
No, it was just looking for similarities with the attitudes of size.
Yeah, and I think size definitely gives you more variety, just because it increases the odds of somebody being a weirdo, weirder than you, different kind of weird kind of stuff. But I think it also creates that opportunity for like that packing thing to happen, where suddenly, it gets so big that this one group kind of pulls together and they have power within the larger group. And I think that can be really bad pressure too. Like if a huge sect of your community decides that they want to mainstream, like their big thing is confidentiality and being able to be more accepted by the larger community. Like they're not so interested in being a niche group. They want to donate to children's charities, and they want to be like out in that kind of a way. I think that can definitely contribute to that kind of homogenizing thing where everyone starts to censor a little bit and then get a little more similar. Same as the spokesperson. It's kind of like comparing. We had this conversation not that long ago with somebody else where the spokesperson for gay marriage is never going to be the super flamboyant queen, ever. It's just not. That's not acceptable enough to everybody. It's always going to be, this super butch gay guy who's very attractive. So there's more pressure to be like
He's very
that
attractive and monogamous. And
yes, that is absolutely going to be the standard if that's the culture of your community. So I think Aaron has a really great point that the larger the community, the more tolerance for diversity. But I think also the bigger the community, the more the opportunity for that kind of homogenizing pressure.
Mm-hmm. All right. Looks like we have some other, probably some of the same viewers. We've got some people watching us right now. I did get a question from Diane about how to join. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to send you something from here because I'm doing this under the Kink Tank account, and I would send you an invite, but I can't because you're not the Kink Tank and you are not friends on Google. Anyways, I hope you're in, maybe we can work that out. You can be part of the next one. But I wanted to let everybody know who is in the viewership, those who are just kind of, watching on the page and not participating in the discussion, that We are open to questions on here. If you'd like to contribute a thought of yours, or if there's a question you'd like to ask sort of the people involved in this discussion in general, or a specific question to a specific person, from your computer, you can do it by hovering your mouse over the screen, and up on top there's a menu where you can open your Q&A app and type in a question for the rest of us, and we'll be able to see it here, and hopefully we can address your question, or just put your thoughts into the mix of things. So if you have something you want to try and contribute, that I'll be watching it. But I don't know. I'm kind of done with my ideas here. I had sort of scribbled out some ideas about peer pressure in the community, and I think we've kind of expanded it to include a lot of other kinds of pressure, not just peer pressure, and sometimes not so blatant. But anybody have anecdotes, examples, areas that you think are important that we haven't covered yet, experiences that you've had, and so forth?
I've had some observations. For example, when young people come in, there's almost a pressure that they should be a bottom or sub by some of the more older or established people here, even if they have a desire more to be a switch or a top. Has anybody else noticed any of that type of behavior? Or
Well, I've heard it in a
Yeah, and to identify. I just want to understand the question.
Let's say a new young person comes out and they want to be a dominant, or they are switch in nature. I have noticed at times that there is pressure by certain people who want to put them in a bottom position. It's like, oh, you should try out being a bottom, or you should try out maybe being more of a sub-oriented, especially if they're in the switch. And if they're young, they haven't gotten experience within the community, they haven't gotten life experience to be able to speak up for themselves. Has anybody else noticed anything like that, or how to go about addressing that?
Well, I don't know. We really only have one younger person in this group.
Well, today.
Well, then, I think, yeah. I think absolutely that happens. And I don't think it's just newer people or just younger people, although that's a really good point, because there are newer people who are older, and I feel like they don't get the same pressure that a newer, younger person gets. I guess because we assume that an older, newer person knows more than they do a lot of the time. But I totally agree with that, and I still get that. I'm not a new person any longer in my mind. I think I've earned the right at this point to say I'm not a new person in any of the communities that I'm involved with, and I still get that all the time. And it is hard. I'm also a pretty secure person, but I get a lot of, well, you should try this out, or maybe you just haven't been with the right partner yet. That's why you're not into this, or you're definitely a bottom. I can just tell talking to you. That kind of speech. And yeah, maybe we haven't spoken long enough is usually what I tell those people.
Yeah, right.
But
you're waiting to convince me and show me the way. Bring it. I'm listening.
Thank God I found you is also
Yeah.
I think that that's totally real, and it's really, really hard. I think it is really hard. Even for a secure person, it's hard to go up against that, because it does make you feel like you're doing it wrong, especially someone who's going to identify as a switch. I think I've heard a lot of people saying that before. It's the same as those people who say without DS your kink isn't real, and there are some people that totally just say, switches are just indecisive, same as a bisexual person.
Yeah.
I've heard the same thing about being a switch, because I'm a switch. I'm super alpha female in life in general, but when it comes to all things sexual, I prefer to be submissive. Mm-hmm. But I've heard people say, well, you've got to pick. You're either a switch, or you're either dominant or you're a submissive. Pick. Right. You can't be both. I've been told that being a switch is just someone who hasn't made their mind up yet. And I'm like, no, I've made my mind up. I am a switch. Like the fence, if you catch my drift,
Yeah.
Even like you were saying about, first coming into the community and stuff, and feeling like everybody's looking at you, trying to kind of figure out, well, is she a top or a bottom? Is she a switch or a dominant? And even my first time I ever went to Munch, I felt that way. I just felt like everybody's trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to make her submissive, or how are we going to make her dominant? Even though they weren't really portraying that, I think a lot of them may have to do with someone's kind of I guess, being nervous when they first come in and not knowing what to expect from everybody else. So automatically your brain goes, oh my God, are they judging me? Are they
Hmm.
trying to figure me out? You know what I mean?
Sure. And there are ageist and sexist attitudes that govern those things still. Josie, when you're talking to people and they're saying, well, I can just tell that you're a bottom, it probably has something to do with your age, and it probably has something to do with your gender. That if you were an old man coming into this with the same personality, I doubt that they would be making those assumptions about you. I think we probably do feel pressure when we're fairly new to the community to try all these different things. There might be some less obvious pressure to identify yourself. Like, what label do you want to use? Wait a second, you told me you were a lesbian, but here you're playing with some guy. What are you? Make up your mind. Like, I want to know what to call you or what box to put you in. And so that's the whole thing. Like, where it used to be, you come into a bunch of people like, so are you dom or sub? Like, those are the only two options. And they expect you to know this, and they expect you to, if you don't know this, they expect you to make up your mind right there and that, like, declare a major right in front of them. And I don't know how much of that, it doesn't seem as overt anymore as far as pressure goes to label. I mean, labels are useful and some people are comfortable with them. But I don't know how much pressure there is on people like, look, you're really confusing me with this whole dominant, but this whole submissive top thing you have going on, where you're submissive to this person, but you top this person. It doesn't compute. People can be confounded and puzzled privately, and that's generally what happens. But I don't see a whole lot of confrontation. Going to the person saying, you really need to make up your mind, or you need to be easier for me to quantify and classify. I don't
feel like it's that overt, but I still get it from some people that are just like, listen, I can't figure you out to the point where I just don't even want to, like, we can't even be friendly. Like, we're just kind of acquaintances at that point, and we just can't even be friendly. Because it's that, like, I think it's irritating to some people to not be able to do that. And that still makes me uncomfortable. Like, I feel bad. I do feel kind of guilty sometimes. Like, I'm sorry I don't do a better job of labeling my stuff for you. And I do feel bad, but some people do, I think, even now, still just kind of put you off in that other category. Like, don't mess around with that. It takes too much energy to understand category.
Yeah. But to your point, Aaron, you're talking about younger people sort of being pressured to not just declare a major or label themselves, but to label themselves a certain way. Right. And I think it probably comes, I've seen this coming from dominance before. Now, that wasn't necessarily a young person, but this person came into the community, was kind of a free agent and fairly knew that they were dominant and straight and a couple of other things about themselves. So they were just kind of hanging. Very polite, very friendly, fun person to have around. Certainly not someone you want to chase away. And there was one dominant in the room that was like, oh, well, just kind of talking. I guess they fancied them, like, oh, this person's hot. I want to get to know them. And it was like, oh, you're a dominant. You sure about that? Are you really sure that you're a dominant? Because in their mind, what they're saying is, I'd really like you to be submissive. And it started off as kind of a joke, okay? But it got insulting after just a little while, where this person was coming to me saying, what's that person's fucking deal? Like, what do I have to do? And I was like, nothing, just forget it. You just got to let it roll off of you. And it was meant to be a sort of flirtatious thing. Like, if I went up to a new person and we were talking and hitting it off and I was like, okay, let's talk about kink. Please tell me you're submissive. Please tell me you're submissive. That might be kind of funny, but to me, it might seem like an appropriate sort of funny thing, but to them it might be like, dude, like, really, you're gonna pull that, like, pressuring me to identify as a submissive? And I didn't necessarily mean it that way. I was just kind of flirting and trying to make light and so forth. We have to allot for a certain amount of that, but I do think there comes a point where you're not just making the person feel uncomfortable, you're actually insulting them. You're basically saying, I don't believe that you are what you say you are. You're really this, and I know better what you are than you do. Do you think these young people that you're talking about, Aaron, do you think that affects them in some way? Is that a negative experience to have? Do you think it
show up and then disappear, and I don't know if it's because of the overt behavior. For example, if they show up and they have a desire to express their dominant side all of a sudden, it's like, I've been submissive in the past, I'm young, so I want to express my dominance. Or I'm a switch and they're new, and finding partners is often quite hard for some. And if you come in as a switch or don't have any life experience or credibility, I guess it's harder to find a person who will bottom to you. And yet several people will show up and say, oh yeah, I'd love to talk to you, you're a switch, at least you can do this, but they never get an opportunity to express their own top side or dominant side, if they were a switch, for example. And when you're getting massive peer pressure to begin with and you're relatively new, is it worth the time to keep coming back until you like, oh no, that guy was just blowing, shooting the breeze, and the other one was just joking, and they're being overtly friendly, or,
Yeah, and there aren't enough good things about the community that they found yet to justify their sticking around. Well, fuck these people, because there's just, it's not worth my effort. If your first encounter is with somebody like that, and you're not particularly well armored, or you haven't had a lot of other good sort of conversation experiences with other, let's say, more enlightened folks in the community, that's the bad taste in your mouth that you walk away with and you never come back. Yeah. And that's unfortunate. But
I consider it a shame.
And I guess we just kind of keep trying to influence the culture, to something that's a little bit less pressury, because that's something I tell the newcomers at our newcomers meetings as well, is that I don't want anybody, the worst thing that we could do is have you walk away having felt uncomfortable. This should be we strive to make it the most comfortable place. So if somebody is calling into question your own identity, imagine yourself a trans person coming in and with female names and referring to themselves in sort of feminine pronouns, and somebody says, yeah, you're a dude, what you got there between your legs? Yeah, sorry, you're a dude. That would be highly insulting, and that person would most likely never come back, and that would be unfortunate. What do we do with that person? What do we do with that person who made the other person feel insulted and uncomfortable? Problem is, we usually don't know about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you really have to enforce your own boundaries, and that I think that's a really unpopular thing to say, but I think it's really important for people to be able to enforce their own boundaries. But on the flip side of that, I feel like this issue that you guys are talking about, that's a really good one to bring up, is like how helpful it is to have like a special interest group and like little things that you can do outside of a munch or outside of a play party, like social things that you can actually get to know someone outside of, like a lot of the social events oftentimes seem like mixers or like places to get a date. And special interest groups just don't feel like that. They feel a little more social. They feel a little more like informational, kind of a place to do some exploring in a smaller kind of a group. I think that's a really ringing endorsement for like the value of that kind of stuff. Like I know as a younger person coming in, it would have been really nice to know, and it still would be nice to have more opportunities to do that, like social outside of munch activities with people who I know off the bat probably will have something in common with me.
Yeah, like a TNG group, or a group that was specifically into a certain kind of play, and that probably also has something to do with them being smaller groups as well, where the special interest groups are not, everybody all at the same time. It's a subset of people, and you tend to talk about your common interest then. You know, it's not just, hey, we're all interested in kink like we are at the Munches in general, but at a special interest group, it's either, you know, separated by gender or age or particular kind of play that you're into, and you have those things to talk about rather than, you know, just general sort of chit chat with everybody in the community, all, you know, a diverse group of people in the community. So I could see where that would be helpful. But do we think that, you know, Aaron brought up age. Is there a discrepancy there between pressure that, you know, are younger people getting screwed on this? Is there a certain extra pressure that younger people feel because of ageist attitudes, for instance? You know, are tops getting the short end of the stick here? Is there who's really experiencing this problem? Can we identify a subset of the group that is having the most problem with this, or
the most problem with which?
With pressure, with experiencing pressure or feeling pressure to be a certain way, to do certain things, or to dress a certain way, you know, whatever it is, you know, to play with more people or to play with fewer people, or to, because it seems to me like it's fairly evenly distributed. Aaron, you were talking about younger people. I mean, do you feel like they're getting it worse?
I've seen a lot written by and against younger people. Let's, for example, a good one would be young males who want to identify as a dominant or a master, and they're only 21, 22 years old. They're not given a lot of credibility. As if they came in, how do they go about getting the experience? Because it does take a while for things to catch on, and you know, other than maybe playing with another young and inexperienced person, if they're lucky enough to find one who doesn't go for someone more experienced already, they seem like they're up shit creek.
Okay, well, they're getting screwed in a certain way, but are they getting screwed in the, as far as pressure goes? Are they being pressured to?
Pertaining to the conversation, I don't know. I'm not a young male, and I, you know, don't speak a whole lot with them. It's just something I've observed. I guess for this discussion, I would say that some young females seem like the first couple people they encounter might be online people who you need to always be submissive to all types of doms. Therefore, you need to address all dominants as sir, or be differential. You're not a true sub if you don't behave a certain way. Therefore, they get that early pressure until they actually encounter, I guess, a community like ours, or someone who's willing to say, no, that's wrong, you don't have to do that, or you only do that once you negotiate it or have consented to do so.
Yeah, I think to your earlier point too, I wonder if that's not some kind of indirect pressure to lie. Like for a younger male to say, oh yeah, well, I actually, in Canada, I am a big deal, or, you know, I've played another, well, I mean, because if people here are going to discriminate against you in that way, I wonder if that's not pressure to kind of drop your integrity for the sake of friendship, which kind of would suck. I get what you're saying. I hadn't thought of it that way. I wonder too about what Nalaine was saying. If it has nothing to do with age or even really orientation, if it really happens mostly to unpartnered, unfamiliar people, like people who don't come in knowing a lot of people. I think I feel a lot more pressure from people who see me as a single person, like pressure to be whatever, because you don't have that added protection of a dominant or just a boyfriend or a girlfriend to kind of step in and say, you know, either back off or to help, like they see you as someone who doesn't have help to decide what you are. I wonder if that's maybe not part of it.
So do you think that, I agree with you. I mean, you put your finger on something that I've been kind of thinking but didn't know how to express. Do you think that's because they're interested in you? Or do you think that it's because if they think that you're new, or they think that you're submissive or passive or shy or something like that, that they have the greatest chance of influencing your ideas about this? You know, is it because they're trying to mold you because they want to have something to do with you, or you're just the only one who will listen and actually maybe even believe them?
I think it's probably both, right? It's probably partially opportunity and then partially like them being interested in you. I see Nelaine is shaking her head yes, so
Did you have something to add, Elaine?
I was just gonna say, I had went to my first Munch that I'd ever went to. Had probably been 11, 12 years ago. I was 21, 20. I was a lot skinnier, a lot younger, and I think I'd said something to you before about this. Why I was nervous to go to the Munch that I went to
Yeah, I
a
remember.
month ago. And it was an older guy. He wasn't super attractive. I'd never been to a Munch before ever, and a friend of mine took me. And when I walked in, automatically my heart literally was going to jump out of my chest. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know, was they going to get in there? Were they going to tie me up and beat the hell out of me? I didn't know nothing about it at that point. You know, I had just stepped into that door. And this guy kept pushing the fact that you've got to be submissive. You just look like a submissive. You just act like a submissive. And at that point, I hadn't really decided, you know, whether I was going to be a submissive or dominant or switch or what I was going to be.
And do you think that's because you were unpartnered or because you were a new person?
Well, I think it was because when I was young, two, it was me and a girlfriend of mine that went. She had been in the community for years. And I'm going in with her, and she told me before we went in, she's like, don't talk to nobody while you're in here unless I'm standing there with you. You know, because when you get in here, some people may not understand that you don't know, you know, a lot about what's going on or about the whole scenario. So I did just that, but at the same time, like I said, I was petrified. I didn't know what was going on. And this guy just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And he made me feel so uncomfortable that I literally did not go back to another Munch until the last Munch that I went to when my sister came with me. That was like 2 or 3 months ago, I think it was.
A little bit different place these days, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very different because back then it was like you almost felt like a piece of raw meat thrown into a shark tank. Honestly, that's the way that I felt. It wasn't about, well, what is it that you're into? What is it that you're looking for? It was more like, how old are you? Or do you have a partner? And how can I get inside of them? Honestly,
You're right.
That's the way they made that I felt, and it scared me off so bad that I was like, I don't want to go back to that place. I don't want to go back around the people, even though I've always had some type of kink in my life, always since I was young, but never really broadened my horizons on it because I really didn't. I was very badly informed on situations, you know, and then to not know what you're getting into and then get there and have that happen to you is enough to run anybody off. You know what I mean? And I've been to, I think, 2 Munches since that first time, and it's like things are changing, and you can tell that it's changed, and you can tell that some of the folks that are there have a little bit more self-control, but you can also look and tell at the ones that are constantly peeping at you, trying to figure you out. And you know, and even if it's not a verbal pressure, there's still that physical pressure where they got all eyes on you. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, we have all kinds.
Yeah.
Well, we got some comments in the Q&A app here. Diane says she doesn't think that it's age based, that it's more personality based, and she kind of goes on to talk about shy people. She brings up a good point because we've talked about men and women, we've talked about older people and younger people, and dominants and submissives and so forth. But we also haven't talked about introverts and extroverts, you know, shy people versus gregarious people. That I think maybe we also have a pressure to socialize. And that's not something that you can really escape because the way that our culture in the Munch has sort of grown over the years is very welcoming. Hey, there's a new person. I want to go talk to them, you know. Of course, we all who have been coming around for a while, we know a lot of these people were very comfortable in the environment, And we're like, of course they want to come and sit with us and then share in this good time that we're having at this table and meet everybody in the room all at once. Or to be introduced in front, hey, everybody, this is so-and-so. No, that's like terrifying to some people. But that maybe it's because we're a social group. We meet, we make a point of gathering to meet people. And so there's a pressure to meet people and socialize and be, sort of interactive with people at Munches.
You're saying there's more pressure on introverted people?
Yes. Nobody ever says, dude, you're too friendly and you're all over the room and every place at the same time. Why don't you just sit down and chill that out? Nobody says that.
Yeah. No, I see that too, and I've heard of it. But unless we know that the person who's coming in has social issues, has shyness or introversion, and we won't know. If I'm walking up to someone, it takes a little while. Oh, okay, you're quiet and you're not really engaging. What's the reason for this? Maybe I should back off. Some extroverts don't because they don't pick up on those social cues, but we do have some. And I remember one lady came in many years ago and she complained. It's like, I was sitting off in the corner and I just minded my own business, everything's fine. And then the host came up and started speaking to me and wanted me to talk and freaked her out. She didn't want to come back. And I'm like, how would you even know that unless you say something?
Just be friendly. That can go the other way. That can go like on the flip side also. I think recently there's been this kind of, I met someone who went the other way where they said, well, I'm introverted and nobody came and talked to me, so there's pressure there that, from an introverted person, kind of indirectly, on more extroverted people, like, you should be more aggressively friendly toward me, because if you're not going to approach me, then your group is unfriendly, and I think that's also kind of unfair.
That happens. Seems like you can't win. It happens from all angles for many different reasons, and someone's always going to complain.
And we've talked about this in Kink Tank discussions before about the best way to approach people. Me as the host, trying to make sure I give permission to everybody. We're here if you want to come and join us, but you don't have to. But I still have the feeling of, well, if you didn't want to get involved, what are you doing at a Munch? Yes, you can sit at a table and eat your pizza and hopefully not be bothered if you don't want to be bothered, but can't you do that at home?
They've typically already taken multiple steps to get to the stage where they're in the building around people. It's like you left your house, you got into your car, you walked through the door to come into the Munch or the social gathering, and now all of a sudden you're balking and getting upset because you want to hide in a corner.
Right, and I understand how uncomfortable that can feel to people who are not, ready to engage the group and so forth. But and I'm a lot more sensitive to it now than I used to be. I've never been a particularly shy person, so it wasn't until I started hosting events like these that I realized just how many shy people there really are, and that there's nothing wrong with that. I always looked at shyness as like, something that needed fixing. Oh, you're shy right now, but wait till you get to know her. It'll be great, and you won't be shy anymore. And that'll be a good thing. That'll be an improvement to you. And I've stopped looking at it that way. But you aren't going to win because, like you said, Josie, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. There are going to be some people who are, nobody came and talked to me. And then other people are like, they came and talked to me and I wanted to be left alone.
Yeah, so we kind of choose the pressure that we feel is the lesser of the two evils.
Well, the idea that I'm acknowledging that you're here and you're welcome to come and join us, and if I get the feeling like they're not, if they look like, they're about to shake out of their skin out of nervous anxiety, I'm not going to drag them over to a table full of people, but there are a lot of people, they look like they're new and they're cautious and so forth, but so they don't really know where to get started, but I don't sense from them that they're particularly shy or introverted people. I will say, here, there's a seat right here, come sit with us, and And that usually works out pretty well. Sometimes I guess wrong, and sometimes other people at the Munch guess wrong, and they do things that really offend or sort of trigger this sort of fight or flight response with shy people, and then we never see them again. Well, I mean, it's bound to happen, I guess. We can't be right all the time. But just as a pressure, I think that's something that we probably have as a community to socialize, to network, to meet people, to not just sit with one or two people, to get to know more people, because it seems almost like the purpose of the group, I guess. And I think a lot of people have had enough positive experiences with having met a wider variety of folks that are involved that they feel like, well, what's not to like? Of course everybody would want this. And I don't even necessarily think it's a bad thing, and I don't necessarily see it changing.
Yeah, I think I also used to be more judgmental of those really introverted people, like the same kind of thing, like, why are you here if you're going to be offended that I'm trying to be friendly with you, or why are you here if you're going to just be so you're so introverted to the point where you look uncomfortable, like every time I see you, you look uncomfortable. And I wonder if those people, and I think I've since just tried to be a little more understanding of them, and I wonder if I wasn't maybe uncomfortable with them because I felt some pressure from them to be protective of them, because they were so introverted, I felt like I should be worried about them. So maybe I was feeling that pressure, and that's what was making me uncomfortable, which is not really mine to own, but I wonder if other people feel that too, and maybe that's why they just don't want to engage those people, because then they feel responsible for them. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we're kind of winding down. If anybody has topics to bring up in the Q&A, if you're one of our viewers, or if any of the folks that are in the room have something else that they'd like to address regarding pressure in the community. Otherwise, I think we'll wrap it up. So, what else? Anything? We kind of addressed all my points in the first hour of this thing, but I like the way this conversation's gone. We've touched on a lot of things that I hadn't really thought of, but that's kind of the purpose of these things anyways.
I think we probably covered it all. I watched most of the first half before I jumped in, and pressure happens. There's positive pressure, there's negative pressure, and I guess it's up to the individuals to determine which is which.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's probably my biggest takeaway from this, is that the pressure isn't always, when we talk about peer pressure, not always necessarily a negative thing. The permission that some people need, peer support, as Josie calls it, I think that's a good. I think a lot of people mean well when they're pressuring. There are some very, obvious and sort of blatant examples of things we wouldn't like to see more of in our community, like Nelane's experience at her first Munch or two. That that's not something that we want to see repeated. But to let somebody know, or my experience at the dungeon where they were saying, "Do you want to play? You can play. If you want to play, you can play with you." And I was offended. I was a little pissed off at the time, but I recognize it now as maybe it was a little bit friendlier. It was a little more well-meaning than I thought it was at the time. I thought it was just, they want my girlfriend naked and they want to see if I can walk the walk. So, they want to see what I'm made of, if I know what the fuck I'm doing, or if I'm some hack wannabe, whatever, so that they can, figure out which slot to put me in.
Remember one of the rules that you used to have at one of the old place that we had, and that was, if someone approaches you for an offer for play, a no is all the answer you need to give. There was no explanation, and I felt that probably tied in heavily with pressure, because if I give you a reason, then you can start trying to pressure that reason away.
Right.
And I thought that was a good rule. And
and not only that, but it's perfectly acceptable, and this was part of the etiquette rules where we had like play rules, which were set in stone. You can do this, you can't do that, you can't do that. And then we had sort of etiquette ideas, which were, it's perfectly acceptable to ask somebody to play, but you need to be ready to hear no, because you probably will, and that doesn't require an explanation.
Right.
And I like that, because as you said, Aaron, as soon as I know the reasons why, if somebody says, well, I won't play with you, Michael, because you're too old for me, well, then I'll just start explaining myself and, how much more experience I have and why they should want to play, and really they just don't want to hear it. Yeah, exactly. They don't want to hear that. They don't want to play with me, and they pinned it on me being too old for them because they thought that would get them off the hook easier.
So it could be just you're creepy, or and it could be any number of reasons. And you don't need to give a reason, because it can be.
And it's easier to say you're too old for me than I don't like you.
Yeah. Which of course creates offense, which might ruin a potentially good friendship. Just because I don't want to play with you doesn't mean I wouldn't be a great friend for you.
Yeah, that's true.
So creates animosity. But I like that rule. And
all right,
who knows when it might come to a yes later, maybe 3 or 4 years down the road.
Well, you're certainly not going to get a yes if you pressure up front. So, if you switch to the long game, you're probably better off. But, I don't, that is something that I think affects my opinions of people. That when if I were to see them pressuring somebody, or if I were to see persistence where it was not welcome, that would really affect my ideas of whether I wanted to be friends with this person, or whether I'd want to be involved with this person, or whether I would recommend that somebody else get involved with this person.
Yeah, and I think other people's responses to pressure also would do the same for me. I totally agree with that. I do the same thing. Then also when I see someone who completely overreacts to some kind of pressure, or who experiences some kind of pressure and then just flies off the handle with, this community is like full of pressure and it's not, it's not healthy and it's dangerous and all that stuff, I think showing a little grace goes a long way. And to me, in the face of pressure, that does a lot also to make me want to be your friend, or to be interested in you as a play partner, or whatever. Sure.
Very good point. And we'll just leave it at that. So we'll stop the broadcast here, and thank you all the panelists that participated and all the viewers who tuned in to watch this. That's it for this time. Thanks for watching us on the Kink Tank. If you like what you saw, why not hit that thumbs up button? There's also a link right there on your screen to subscribe so you can get every one of our upcoming videos. Can't wait for the next episode? Try the previous video below on age, aging, and ageism in the community. We hope to see you next time, so while you're kinking, remember to do it safely.